Ladies and gentlemen, and mech aficionados, brace yourselves as we introduce the one, the only Professor Kirby. The genius behind the Kirby's Battlemech Compendium, the man who has travelled from one end of the inner sphere to the other, or more accurately, just far enough to stay out of the crossfire. You know the drill. Wars, battles, conflicts, he's seen them all. From a very respectable distance, mind you. Pirates, yes, pirates too, dear friends. He's danced his way out of danger, swaying to the rhythm of laser fire, while maintaining the perfect disheveled but stylish look. And speaking of style, dining with kings and earls is just another casual evening for Professor Kirby. After all, when you're known by just your first name on numerous planets and have a holiday home on Terra itself, formal titles become rather trivial. So, dear conference attendees, buckle up for a keynote that promises opinions galore as our distinguished guest shares his wisdom, accumulated through countless travels. After all, when it comes to understanding the inner sphere, our speaker isn't just on the map. He's the cartographer, the travel guide, and the ultimate expert in metropolitan culture. Everyone, please be upstanding and put your hands together for Professor Kirby.
Welcome, dear listener, to Kirby's Battlemech Compendium. Written and compiled by Periphery et al., I am your orator Shrapnel. Join in the conversation on the Mech Warrior 5 Mercenary Facebook page, and check out Periphery Pence on Insta for Battletech eye candy.
Entry number 5, Atlas AS7-D, also known as Actually the Worst. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. Today's entry is going to be a bit of a wild ride. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most well-known, most feared, and deadliest mechs to ever walk the inner sphere. A lumbering 100-ton behemoth, built with a skull-shaped death's head as specifically requested by Alexander Krensky, commander of the SLDF and architect of its exodus. Many authors have written many words to praise the Atlas, but I want to make something very clear from the beginning. This episode isn't going to be another swan song to the Atlas and its might. In this entry, I'm going to do my best to explain why, at least in my opinion, the original AS7-D Atlas is an intentionally deeply flawed mech, built as part of a master grand scheme by one of history's greatest tacticians to bamboozle the great houses. But first, as always, we need to start with some history. From the earliest days of the Terran hegemony, after it was formed from the ashes of the Terran Alliance and eventually paved the way to found the Star League, the Terran hegemony was able to rule in a more or less benevolent manner simply by having the largest and best equipped military backed up by the strongest industrial base in the entire galaxy. By being the personification of the ancient quote, "speak softly and carry a big stick," the hegemony armed forces simply existing meant that other nations eventually fell into line one way or the other. All that began to change, though, once the Star League was founded. During the reunification wars from 2577 to 2597, the various great houses of the Star League banded together with the Terran hegemony in order to force 4 major periphery states into joining the Star League. Aside from the moral implications of forcing unwilling parties to join your nation at gunpoint, the various Star League armies committed numerous atrocities against these periphery states, clearly signaling to all of those outside of the Star League that the age of Terran hegemony benevolence was officially over. For those within the Star League, however, life was mostly peaceful, until the 27th century when Star League First Lord Michael Cameron II passed the Council Edicts of 2650. This resolution was designed to limit the size of the Star League member states' militaries. And you may be asking yourself, gee, doesn't that sound a little tyrannical for a mostly benevolent government? Well, the answer to that question is a resounding yes. It very much is. And it definitely marks the beginning of the Terran hegemony's desperate attempt to maintain control of the Star League and thus the various great houses by any means necessary. Several important changes had taken place in the 50 years since the reunification wars. First, the nature of the Terran hegemony's armed forces had changed. The bulk of the hegemony's troops had been absorbed into armies stationed all around the inner sphere and blended with troops from the various great houses, in order to at least give the appearance of being unified for a common good. The only troops that the Terran hegemony held direct control over were the relatively small yet very well-equipped SLDF Royal Divisions. The other major change was that the great houses themselves had developed strong industrial bases and robust economies, and in turn began developing their own powerful militaries. This presented an ever-increasing problem for the Terran hegemony, who found themselves struggling to keep the various powers in line. With less and less for their subjugated powers to fear, the Council Edicts of 2650 were the first in a string of authoritarian policies set in place in an attempt to ensure lasting control of the Star League for the Terran hegemony, but it had the end result of greater and greater discontent with hegemony rule. On the back burner during these turbulent political times, the brass of the SLDF Royal Divisions knew all too well that it was only a matter of time before they were called upon to back up these unpopular policies. In 2738, when Alexander Kerensky became overall commander of the SLDF, he recognized that in light of the wave of unpopular policies the Star League had put into place, particularly heavy taxation with little to no representation on periphery states, which will sound very familiar to our American listeners, history was bound to repeat itself and some sort of uprising was inevitable. Kerensky knew that he was in desperate need of any kind of weapon or advantage to keep the various great houses in line. Krensky then began a near total reorganization of the SLDF, eliminating inept or incompetent officers who gained their rank through social standing and set into motion widespread, decades-long war games across the entire inner sphere, pitting entire armies consisting of house troops and hegemony regulars against the hyper-elite, well-equipped royal divisions. Ostensibly, Kerensky did this as a way to hone the SLDF's skills and prepare them for any threat. But, in my humble opinion, the decades of war games and fake campaigns were simply intended to remind the great houses who was in charge, with a vast display of strength, and remind them who and what they would have to fight against should they rebel. It should then come as no surprise that it was during this time Kerensky himself laid down the requirements and began producing some of the most fearsome mechs ever to stride into battle, such as the King Crab, Devastator, and of course, the mighty Atlas. So, now, with all that being said and the preamble out of way, we can begin to finally analyze the design of the Atlas itself. It's undeniable that the AS-7-D Atlas is a top-tier, immensely powerful short-range brawler. Under Kerensky's guidance, the Atlas was designed with the most powerful alpha strike possible and the heat management to deliver it without hesitation. The AS-7-D also carries the maximum amount of armor that any one mech can carry, making it the best protected mech ever conceived. Combined, this meant that the Atlas could absolutely devastate any opponent in a spectacular fashion never before seen. Well, provided the enemy was at point-blank range and didn't have the ability to run away at even a moderate speed. Indeed, all that firepower very much came at the expense of range and speed. The only weapon that the Atlas has at its disposal that can shoot further than 270 meters is an LRM-20, and while it surely carries the potential to do large amounts of damage, veteran tabletop players will be quick to point out to you that on average only 12 missiles from a salvo of 20 hit. Since the Atlas only carries enough ammo for 12 volleys, by all probability, the Atlas will only be able to do roughly 144 points of damage spread across an entire mech, and even that is assuming that the pilot nails every single shot. Unfortunately, in all reality, an Atlas is pretty much totally defenseless past 270 meters once the LRMs run dry, and realistically, not that much better off when it does have the LRMs. This is an especially big problem for a mech that running at full speed can only reach 54 kilometers per hour. These are incredibly important numbers to keep into perspective. For example, 270 meters is just 800 feet, or barely longer than an eighth mile drag strip, and 54 kilometers per hour is 33 miles an hour. Once the Atlas's LRM ammo bins run dry, the likelihood of an Atlas being able to catch up to an opponent to use any of its vast short-range firepower is slim to none, leaving an enemy free to take however long it needs to pick apart the Atlas while constantly dancing just out of its reach. Truly, in reality, even a halfway decent pilot with a somewhat nimble medium mech and a PPC should not struggle to take down an Atlas given enough time and patience. Simply exhaust its LRM stores and then keep it out of range. In fact, a short list of things that could outrun and outrange the most fearsome war machine of all time would include a Toyota pickup truck with an AC-5 in the bed, a farm tractor carrying a large laser, or someone's child on a dirt bike with a bolt-action rifle. Not only is the Atlas this slow and this short range, but the damn thing is 13 meters or 40 feet tall, making it a prime target for any artillery, aerospace fighters, or even warships in low orbit to simply obliterate before the Atlas can even hope to get in range to use any of its weapons. At this point, we really do need to ask ourselves the question: if Krensky intended for the Atlas to be an end-all assault mech, why is it such a one-trick pony? The Atlas was designed in an age when extralight engines, endo-steel, double heat sinks, and weapons like the Gauss rifle were available and in common use. So why would Krensky forego any sort of advanced tech that would help remedy some of the Atlas's shortcomings? Some may argue that the Atlas's extreme range and mobility issues aren't that big of a deal because the Atlas is intended to be supported by other mechs that will keep it safe until it can bring its weapons into range, or that mechs are never deployed alone, and thus its drawbacks really aren't so severe. Well, to these arguments, I would say that you're right, and that's largely kind of the point. Not only is the Atlas large and expensive on its own, but unless you dedicate significant resources to keeping it safe on the battlefield, it's a sitting duck. I think that the Atlas's shortcomings were entirely intentional and planned by Kerensky, because he knew that the member states were incredibly prone to a, quote, keeping up with the Joneses, unquote, type mentality, and were very eager to buy anything and everything they could that the Terran hegemony itself used. You see, up until this point, the Terran hegemony only very rarely let the great houses buy the same mechs and equipment that the royal divisions received. Typically, the great houses had to either buy the lukewarm hand-me-downs from the hegemony after the royal divisions were done with them, or design their own mechs at great cost and then hope the hegemony allowed them to use them. And wouldn't you know, from the moment the Atlas was released, the Terran hegemony allowed Defiance Industries to sell the mech to everybody and anyone who was willing to cut a check. Krensky was a very wise man, and he knew that if he made as big of a deal as possible about his grandiose new mech, and then specifically used the galaxy-wide wargames to show the great houses carefully curated examples of how effective the Atlas could be in specific circumstances, the great houses would froth at the mouth to buy the new mech without stopping to think about the bigger tactical picture and how effective the mech actually was. And buy them they did in such great quantities that it became the staple command and juggernaut mech for every great house army. In my opinion, this was Kerensky's masterful way of manipulating the great houses to use their own greed and lust for power to give the Terran hegemony the advantage that it needed. Kerensky had purposefully created an intentionally flawed assault mech and then used the war games and propaganda to hyperbolize it in ways that had never before been done, to make it irresistible to military officers all over the inner sphere. By tricking the member states of the SLDF to invest heavily in acquiring new and flawed atlases, he was forcing any upstart member of the military to tie up significant amounts of funds and resources that could have been used for purchasing more effective weapons, giving the hegemony an economic advantage that translated directly into a battlefield advantage. Furthermore, not only did the great houses tie up significant amounts of money in buying the Atlas, but because it could not operate without significant support units in order to keep it safe, Each Atlas on the battlefield meant that its commander also had to dedicate even more troops to that area, thinning lines elsewhere and forcing the commander to fight in predictable, controlled ways. As further proof that Krensky was fully intending to use the Atlas as a liability to exploit against the great houses, as all this was going on, Krensky began outfitting his own troops, the Royal Regiments, with other assault mechs, such as the Devastator, Gunslinger, and Nightstar, that excelled at long-range combat and almost seemed custom-tailored to exploit an army relying on the heavily short-ranged Atlas. In fact, just 10 years after the AS-7-D was released in 2765, the Atlas II was designed and released. The Atlas II completely redesigned the Atlas, corrected every issue that it had, and, conveniently, was exclusively only available to the Terran Hegemony run SLDF Royal Divisions. To say the least, the Atlas II thoroughly and completely mops the floor with the original Atlas, and it needs little to no support to do it. Thus, it is my firm assertion that I believe instead of actually trying to make a good mech with the Atlas, Krensky purposefully designed it as flawed and relatively easy to defeat, and then hyped it up to the point where the great houses could not help themselves but to buy it, and buy it in such great quantities that it became the de facto standard assault mech in every military that Krensky was most likely to fight, while Krensky himself armed his troops so that they were specifically suited to fight the flawed mech that everyone else had adopted as the cornerstone of their army. This daunting plot would give him and the Terran Hegemony a far greater advantage against the other member states of the SLDF than any one particular mech design ever would. Everyone has heard Krensky's famous quote about the Atlas: "A mech as powerful as possible, as impenetrable as possible, and as ugly and foreboding as conceivable, so that fear itself will be our ally." However, Krensky is not describing the ultimate war machine. He's describing the ultimate propaganda machine. And he's not intending to use it against the enemy. He wants to use it against his own allies, just in case he ever has to fight them. The entire value of the Atlas to Krensky was to purposefully use the great house's own pride, greed, and arrogance against them in order to get them to tie up immense amounts of time and money adopting a mech that was intentionally flawed and that Krensky could handily defeat if the need arose. Either way, the original Atlas AS-7-D didn't have long to wait before being forced into actual combat. In 2780, Stefan Amaris shot First Lord Richard Cameron in the back of the head with a jeweled laser pistol, kicking off the Amaris Civil War and the eventual collapse of the Star League. The vast majority of the AS-7-D Atlases were assigned to either command, bodyguard, or strategic defense roles, keeping them off the front line and in situations where they were likely to survive by hiding, staying put, and seeing if the enemy had the balls to tiptoe closer before accidentally crossing the 270-meter threshold and getting turned into smoldering slag. Thus, the legend and reputation of the Atlas were preserved. It's interesting to note that when Alexander Krensky called for Exodus in 2784 and left for uncharted space with more than 80% of the surviving SLDF, so many Atlas pilots refused to go that they made up nearly 2/3 of the troops who chose to stay. Since hot takes abound in this entry, here's another one. It's my assertion that so many Atlas pilots chose to stay because they knew their mech's shortcomings and, more importantly, they knew that the fear the enemy held for them was largely based on carefully curated propaganda, and they assumed that if they left with Krensky, they would be forced into combat roles where they could not fulfill their duties based on expectations they were never able to meet. Maybe you agree with me, maybe not. But I urge you to remember that if your only experience with the Atlas is through the video games take very specific liberties with both range and speed to make flawed mechs like this more enjoyable for gameplay reasons. Even if this is the case for you, Hopefully, this entry gives you some food for thought on the lore and reasons for the birth of the iconic Atlas, and maybe it will give you some insight on why I don't think it was for quite the reasons that you thought.
Hello everyone, Shrapnel here, and welcome to the 5th and first special edition of Kirby's Battlemech Compendium. Joining us for discussion is none other than the Professor himself to explain his heinous actions and egregious slurs on our most beloved assault mech.
Here I am, yours in the flesh. I am Mr. Kirby, and I am here to accept your hate for my vicious opinions.
Remember, don't send hate mail to me. Go on Kirby's Insta and send it there.
I am Periphery Paint on Instagram. You may direct all your death threats there.
I don't think you get death threats. At least I hope not.
Well, my Merc persona
But
might.
shit.
Hopefully. I'm a dude that paints minis, but there's this asshole that comes out when I start talking about Battletech.
Isn't there one in all of us?
Oh, isn't that the truth?
Isn't there one in all of
Absolutely.
us? Before we get on to the main meat, tell us a little bit about the compendium,
Well,
Kirby.
so I've been a lifelong fan of Battletech, and one of the main reasons I've always loved Battletech is that, I mean, you have franchises that have established lore, and then you have Battletech, where, if you really get into the nuts and bolts in Battletech, it's phenomenal how you don't just have this overarching story of the franchise and where it's going. You have stories and lore for each individual person, each individual planet. If you look hard enough and you want to get this far into it, you can look up any mech and look up the company that made the weapons on the mech, and then look up the history and lore behind that company and the history of why they made that one specific weapon. And it's just insane to me how deep this stuff goes, and kind of the central revolving point of whatever you play in the Battletech sphere, whether it's classic Battletech, Alpha Strike, Mech Warriors, the abominations that are Mech Assault. Just kidding, please no death threats. I know they're great games, they're fine. But it's all about the mechs, right? And it really is hard to find a good, solid, deep dive on the battle mechs themselves. And I know that there's a lot of creators out there that are making videos on the various mechs, and it's all well and good, but it's really kind of all the same thing over and over and over again. They mostly just kind of peruse the Sarna article and put it into video format for anybody that's an audio listener instead of a visual person. And I figured that there was probably room for a series that would kind of go a little bit deeper than that. And if you look at the battle mechs and then apply that knowledge to what was going on around the time that they were made, or what was happening in the inner sphere or the periphery or the clan homeworlds when this particular thing was introduced. And when you look at it in that way, a lot of these mechs become a lot more interesting, and they have a lot more that goes into them. And I think, just as a quick aside, one of the best case in points for that is the classic Shadowhawk, because if you look around any of the forums or any of the Facebook groups, talk to anybody who plays Battletech, and you really kind of get the same answer, that it's this useless relic that does almost nothing well. But we'll do a whole episode on the Shadowhawk eventually, because if you really dive into the history of this particular mech, it's nothing but groundbreaking. And everything about that mech was revolutionary when it came out, because it was one of the very first battle mechs. And when you take that into consideration and you look at it from that perspective, it's a work of art. It's not a useless piece of metal. It's literally something that changed the battlefield when it came out. And a lot of people kind of look at it, this mech that came out in, say, 2040 or 2050, they look at it from the perspective of someone sitting in 3030 or 3040, and, well, in that case, it looks and acts like a relic because it is. And I think that kind of gets lost a lot. And that's kind of what I'm trying to bring up with the series is go deeper, go further, and look into more of the politics and environment of what was going on when these mechs came out.
Yeah, I think most players like me skim record sheets to pick mechs, and they generally just go, what about the loadout? Is the speed right? Is the armor right?
Yeah.
don't really go beyond that because, you know, for some people it's just a tabletop game.
Sure, yeah.
But actually, the amount of, I mean, can you imagine if they have to cross-reference something? Who made this again? I'll just go to the record cabinet and just pull it out, and it's like 6 rooms of just little cards going, see card C13 on shelf 17. Oh, the reference system must be amazing.
Great case in point to back that thought up is the episode we did on the Banshee. I mean, if you know, the Banshee has been around almost as long as Battletech, and if you look at it just from the record sheets or just from skimming Sarna, the thing's damn near useless. It doesn't do anything.
I did immediately trade my first ever Banshee CGL mini in about 30 seconds after looking at the record sheet.
Yep.
I was like, this is rubbish.
Right, yeah. I mean, if you look at it, it's an absolute horrible waste of BV and tonnage. And granted, you know, it is. But if you get into the history of it, you see that, you know, the Banshee is a contemporary of the Mackie. It's that old. Yeah. I mean, the original Banshee came out, I forget what it is off the top of my head, but it's something like 5 to 10 years after the original Mackie, which was the first mech. So, you know, you kind of have to give it that grace, and then you also have to remember that this all went down during the Succession Wars era, where, I mean, you have A-list top-tier military commanders literally duct taping autocannons onto industrial mechs and saying, fuck it, that'll work. So, you know that this is an environment where literally anything that moves and shoots is going to the front line. And so then you have all these Banshees that they're too expensive to get rid of, because I mean, technically it's a gun in the sense that, like, the pipe weapons in Fallout are guns, so it doesn't make financial sense to get rid of it, so you send it to the furthest, most backwater world that you can, just so you have some token force there. And then you wait until your military gets desperate enough for anything, and then send it to the front line with the specific hope that it absorbs enough fire to make the enemy want to go away.
It does cast a very large shadow on a little backwater world, doesn't it?
Yeah. And that's kind of what you have to keep in mind with the Banshee, is that, you know, it survived for almost, 600 years? Like, try and wrap your mind around that. Like, I mentioned this in the script for that episode, but the prospect of a Banshee coming onto the battlefield in 3030 is the same thing as Spanish conquistadors with muskets getting put up against the U.S. Marines.
I instantly regretted the trade. Well, I didn't, because I got an archer out of it. But then I traded it to a German in our group, and he instantly went, yeah, it does like 30 points of kicking damage.
Yeah,
like,
there's that.
And it moves quickly enough to get there.
Yep. But I mean, if you're on a world towards the periphery with a total population of 6, and the biggest threat you're ever going to face is a guy with a pistol, it's a pretty good deterrent.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just going to stand on the outhouse where you're having a dump.
Yep.
All right, let's get into the Atlas hate.
Yes, my inflammatory opinions on the Atlas.
I will say right now, up front, send hate mail to my Insta or YouTube comments, whatever. I don't like the Atlas. I have many reasons. I suspect that they're going to coincide with Kirby's. But I'll let you lead off with the beef against the Atlas.
I hope that I stressed in the episode script enough that I think that, you know, the Atlas was purposefully made by Krensky to be easy to defeat. Because, I mean, if you look at the history of the Terran hegemony and how they handled the Star League, you have to play nice, right? Because you have the main SLDF force, which is supposed to be the common army for the common good. But Kerensky's loyalties lie to the hegemony and by extension to Star League, but he is essentially a hegemony figurehead. And so when they say you are in control of the Star League, what they're actually saying is you are in control of making sure that the Terran hegemony stays the top dog. And to that end, you all of a sudden have all these regular SLDF troops that are this amalgamation of troops from all the great houses plus the hegemony. And I think Krensky is smart enough to figure out that at some point in time, somebody's going to rebel. I mean, especially because you think that one of the biggest members of the Star League is the Draconis Combine and House Kurita, and you're talking about a nation state whose sole explicit purpose is manifest destiny and control of the entire inner sphere.
I was going to say, they always play so nicely with everyone else,
right?
Don't they? They like to share all their toys, and they have each other around for parties all the time.
Right, yeah. As the overall commander of the SLDF, you have to consider that like there's going to come a point in time where somebody's going to rebel. And so I think he's smart enough to realize that in the long term, and unfortunately for him, he was correct, probably within his lifetime, he's going to be in a situation where it's going to be some percentage of the regular SLDF forces versus loyal SLDF forces and the Royal Regiments. And the big key there is the Royal Regiments, because the Royal Regiments are specifically and only Terran hegemony forces. So if there's one sort of backbone, if you will, that you can count on, it's the Royal Regiments. So you get into like the early 2070s or 2700s when the Atlas first came out, and you're in a very turbulent period where Krensky knows he can't really outright do anything to favor the Royal Regiments more than they already do. But the house troops are getting stout enough, and the regular SLDF is getting stout enough that you have this huge question of how do I make sure that we stay the top dogs? And it really makes sense to me, looking at the lore, that when you look at the Atlas and when you consider the Atlas, like it really is pretty much useless past 9 hexes. I mean, completely and totally useless. You have an LRM-20, great, but the LRM-20 carries 12 shots. Your pilot's probably going to nail half of those. So you've got 6 volleys that hit. Of those 6 volleys, half your missiles are going to hit. So you're doing 10 to 12 points of damage with each, and it's cluster damage. I don't want to hear it. The Atlas is not good at range, and it's not fast enough to get there. I mean, it's a great short-range brawler. It's a great urban combatant. It's a great static defender. But the thing is that they promoted the Atlas as the be-all, end-all main battle assault mech for any and every purpose. And that's what Krensky specifically promoted. That's what Krensky wanted the great houses and his own SLDF troops to think of it. And it worked. In almost every army, the Atlas was adopted as the premier, the main assault mech. And so if you think about that from a tactical perspective, your main battle tank is useless past, 360 meters? And it's not fast enough to get there. So that is a huge tactical flaw that if you were ever going to have to fight this army, you could exploit. Because all you have to do is say, design the Atlas II, which is good at long range, and you immediately have a weapon that completely counters your enemy's best weapon. So I think that's kind of the crux of the Atlas right there, is I think that Krensky specifically designed it to be a very, very short range, very, very inexpensive premier assault battle mech with the specific purpose of overhyping it so that everybody, whether it was SLDF or house troops, bought it, adopted it, and based their tactics around it. And so then, moving forward, he knew that, okay, if my Royal Regiments ever have to turn around and fight anybody else, we have a massive tactical advantage over anybody's assault mechs on the field. And, I mean, really, it's going to take a lot to convince me that they don't have that advantage, because even if you look at it from an economic perspective, if you're using the Atlas is just expensive enough. I think it's right about 9.5 or 10 million C-bills. It's just enough of an asset that it's not expendable. So if it's on the battlefield and there's any chance of any kind of long-range combat, you are forced to dedicate additional assets to protect that Atlas. And that's a huge economic disadvantage too, because now you're dedicating more units that could be used elsewhere to protect this one stupid thing that can't shoot farther than can throw a rock.
Yeah, see, I think about it as Kerensky pulled the old Dreadnought scheme on them. Back at the end of World War I, the British Navy came up with the Dreadnought, and it was the biggest battleship that had ever been seen with the biggest guns, and every other nation looked at it and went, we want one, and they abandoned every other ship that they were making to build Dreadnought. But it turns out Dreadnoughts are really big, really expensive, require support ships to protect them or move with them. And it basically condenses your military down to a few, say, elite specialist vehicles, when actually if you against a swarm, you're going to lose. Because you might have the bigger guns, but they have more small
that's
guns.
a fantastic. I didn't even think about that. That's a perfect example. I mean, that literally sounds, at least in my head, pretty much exactly what Kerensky did. He convinced everybody to buy this intentionally flawed assault mech with the express purpose of giving himself a tactical advantage while tying up additional resources.
If you look at the other assault mechs that are available for that time period for Star League Royal, General, and Standing Army, see if you like any of these over the Atlas. You've got the Pillager, 2 AC-20s or 2 Gauss rifles with double heat sinks. You've got King Crab, which was another Kerensky order. You got 2 AC-20s. You're going to take something slow that does lots of damage, probably that. You've got the Atlas II, 10 years after your D was put out. Significant improvement, double heat sinks, got a good mix of energy and ammo weapons, and long range. You've got the Annihilator, which is just filled with like 4 LB-10s or something ridiculous. You've got the Night Star, if you drop down to 90 tons. It's got the same movement, same armor, 2 Gauss and an ERPPC with pulse lasers. You've got the Highlander, which can either be good or bad, depending on which model you go with. The Royal one's good. The normal one is a bit like the Atlas. You've got the Emperor, and you've got the Xanthos 30. It's got more structure, more armor, more weapons, more heat sinks than the Atlas. And then you've got the Titan, which was found later on. But it turns out that was Kerensky's replacement for the Atlas because he didn't like its dependency on ammo. It was too slow, and he didn't like the weapons that it had. And it goes to nearly, it's 2 PPCs, 6 medium lasers, 4 SRM4s, and 1 SRM6, which I think we can both agree is significantly better than an AC-20 with an LRM-20.
Because it can shoot farther than like an average residential-sized lot. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it never saw the field because it got locked up in a research place that got bombed or something.
Semantics.
And they found it later on. Yeah, I know.
Technically, that was also the Devastator, but who's counting?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would take Thunderhawk, a Pillager, a King Crab. I wouldn't take the Annihilator, Night Star, the Emperor, or a Titan. Definitely take a Xanthos over an Atlas.
I'd take any of them over an Atlas. And I mean, you kind of bring up an interesting point too. Is the first two, right? The Pillager and the King Crab. Those two designs were also specifications that Kerensky himself laid down. And the interesting thing here is that he laid those down at the same time that he laid down the specifications for the Atlas. So all three of those mechs were made in conjunction with each other. Now, the King Crab and the Pillager were only available to, drumroll, the Royal regiments. Yeah, they were only available to the Royals, who are Kerensky's troops that he's got in his pocket that he can rely on in the instance that he has to fight the Star League Standing Army or the House troops. So now look very specifically at what these two mechs do. What does the Pillager with 2 Gauss rifles do? It eats the Atlas for lunch at long range. What does the King Crab with 2 AC-20s do? It eats the Atlas for lunch at short range. So that furthers my confidence in the idea that Kerensky was purposefully and willingly building a flawed mech with the Atlas, because at the same time, he's literally building the antidote for his own poison and only giving it to himself with those two mechs.
Yeah.
So he's hyping up the Atlas and getting everybody to buy the Atlas, while at the same time building the perfect weapons to counteract what he's giving to everyone else. And then, here comes the Atlas II 10 years later, which is just a condensed all-in-one Atlas ass-kicking machine that he, again, only gives to the Royals.
Yeah, I mean, I've never played with the Atlas II. I've just been looking at it. 2 ER large lasers, 2 medium pulse lasers, LRM-20, SRM-6, and an
Tell
LB-10.
me that that's not a loadout that is specifically designed to take down a short-range assault mech at long range.
I've just been looking at it. You got the LB-10 out to 18 hexes, LRM-20 up to 21, ER large lasers 19. Definitely feels like it, doesn't it?
I mean, it sure does. Like, if you were to come to me and ask me to fire up Mega Mech Lab and design something to take down an Atlas in the late 2700s, I'd probably come up with either the Pillager with Gauss rifles or the Atlas II.
would come up with the
That
Thunderhawk.
works too. That's a good mech right there.
I know.
45
I
points
know.
of
3
damage.
Gauss rifles.
Ooh,
Oh, I know. So we would be remiss if we didn't speculate on the Atlas after using it on the tabletop too, because I know you're a big tabletop player.
Absolutely.
What's your thoughts of it on the tabletop, off paper, so to
So
speak?
one of the things that I do want to stress with the Atlas is that I make no bones about the fact that the Atlas is an excellent short-range brawler. I mean, it is fantastic if you can get closer than from me to my computer monitor. But I mean, in that regard, I will say that, you know, I don't want to come across as just like, forget the Atlas. The Atlas is trash. There's nothing redeemable about the Atlas, because that's not true. I mean, the Atlas definitely does have its strengths and its advantages, and when played properly in the right environment and so close that you can see the whites of your enemy's eyes, it is a terrifying combatant. And so if we're talking about a close quarters, say maybe like a wooded canyon or an urban environment, and I can't have either a king crab or an urban mech, then yeah, I'm probably going to take an Atlas, because in that light it does shine. But it doesn't detract from my point that that's not what Krensky pitched it as. He pitched it as an all-around unit that you can base the cornerstone of your assault formations on, and that's something it simply is not. And in my experience playing on tabletop, I think that that's pretty true to real life. I mean, well, as real life as Battletech can be. I mean, if you dedicate the BV to an Atlas and you put it on the tabletop, you had better find some cover for it and keep it there until the optimal moment, or you're going to get torn apart at long range.
My experience using the Atlas and versing the Atlas is it's just a giant goddamn walking target.
Yep.
First ever time I played one, I was playing a guy called Ben. He walked it from the other side of the tabletop, and he spent a good chunk of his BV on this thing. I had a Marauder first time, gyro crit. Down it went. Next time I versed an Atlas, engine crit, like in turn 2. And then when I've used it, it gets battered by turn 3 or 4. Because everyone just goes, Atlas, kill it.
Right. It has that shoot me target printed on it just by nature of being a 100-ton assault mech.
Yeah, and I often find assault mechs are not worth the BV. I'd rather bring a couple of heavies or a heavy and a medium.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I'm largely in the same boat. I prefer, oh God, I hate to say this because I hate the politics and the culture, but simply tactically speaking, my playstyle probably aligns best with the Draconis Combine, because I prefer a higher volume of very fast and nimble mediums and heavies rather than anything else.
Yep. I have done one game where I took 3 Atlases. That was my lance. And what I found was they could take a hell of a punishment, but they can't really dish out that much.
Say, how did you do?
Oh, I got swarmed by mediums and lights. I just got the shit kicked out of me.
Oh, yeah.
Literally.
As Kerensky wanted.
Yeah. So you think it's going to be this massive walking weapon, and it's not. It's just got a bullseye painted on it, and you just get peppered before you even get into action.
I mean, even if you have never seen the record sheet, or even if you don't know what an Atlas is, you set that mini on the table, and everybody's got that instant draw of like, I need to kill that. That looks bad.
4th edition box set. 4th edition box set was my introduction to the Atlas, of it standing there with its smoking half arm falling off and fire behind it. And you just sit there going, oh my God, that thing looks scary.
The Mech Warrior 3 intro, where you have the clanners running over the hill, annihilating little combat vehicles and infantry, and then the big terrifying Mad Cat comes in, slaughtering everyone, and just runs head first into an armless Atlas that just goes, no sir.
Bye-bye.
That's how you use the Atlas. You hide it in a fucking city until something is dumb enough to come within arm's reach, and then you delete it permanently.
Have we just said that basically Atlas is a 100-ton urban mech?
Yes, we have. No. See, because the Urban Mech is well designed, so I don't know if the Atlas qualifies. But
And that bit won't make the cut.
$10 says it does. But no, I mean,
we like the controversy.
I do. The Urban Mech is the very short, very slow hill that I will die on. There's a soundbite that'll make it in.
The speed bump.
the small trash can full of hate. But no, I mean, I think too, like, I mean, so the talking about the BV and dedicating the BV to the Atlas II, I mean, you can also look at it from that angle just to see kind of how poorly designed the Atlas is, because another thing with the Atlas is that another thing in general that I like to look at when I'm writing the scripts for these mechs is to look at the contemporaries and see what was coming out at the same time and see what kind of technologies were available. And I think if I remember right, the next episode that we're going to do is the Crusader, which really dives into this specific point hard.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that not just Kerensky, but the Star League like to do in general is withhold technology from the regular house troops and the standing army in order to give the royal regiments an advantage. I mean, that's not groundbreaking. We've known that for a while. The Crusader just happens to kind of be the poster boy for that, because, I mean, seriously, you can't do anything with it unless you have double heat sinks. But if you look at the design of the Atlas, knowing what they had available at their disposal, it really just, it doesn't make sense. I mean, it really doesn't, because if you, specifically with the Atlas, I mean, it carries, what, off the top of my head, I think 21 single heat sinks.
It's 20.
Okay, so you could have swapped the damn thing over to double heat sinks and saved 10 tons. And I did the math in the Megamech lab build, or Megamech lab, one time, and I think by swapping the Atlas from single heat sinks to double heat sinks, you save that 10 tons. The cost goes up by like 200,000 C-bills, and the BV goes up by like 10, I think. And then you have a whole extra 10 tons where you could give it, I don't know, God forbid, 2 ER large lasers. You could pull out the LRM-20 and put in a Gauss rifle. I mean, there's any number of things you could have done just by giving it double heat sinks. But they didn't. They specifically, and this is where I keep saying over and over again that when I write this stuff, I like to keep in context with the time and contemporaries. When the Atlas was designed and made by the people who designed it and made it, choosing to make a premier assault mech with single heat sinks would have been a very extremely deliberate choice to make. Like, that's not a choice that they made because it was the standard thing to do. It wasn't. Double heat sinks were standard. It wasn't something that they did to keep costs down, because it didn't. It's something that they specifically looked at and would have had to be like, the smart thing to do here is to give it 10 tons of redundant heat sinks that we don't have to.
I'm just looking at it. It's 1,893 BV, 9.6 million C-bills, as opposed to 11.1 million C-bills for the Atlas II, or 2,100 BV.
I mean, it's that you're.
I would pay the 300 more.
Right, like you're hardly increasing either your C-bill or BV cost for something that is infinitely better. Everything about it to me just makes me believe that this had to be something that was built to be deliberately flawed. I like your Dreadnought example. That's pretty much exactly it.
Nations ruined themselves trying to keep up by building bigger and better, but not necessarily thinking about, is it actually better?
Is it useful?
And I kind of see the Trojan horse that he planted with this. Like you say, he gave them a weapon that doesn't work against them.
Yeah, and I mean,
but you can use it against everyone else.
Yeah, to sum it up in 30 seconds, like I think Kerensky made a very, very wise tactical choice by knowing that eventually he was going to have to fight everyone else, so why not give everyone else something that they wouldn't be able to use effectively against him?
Yeah. In fact, I remember a story of his second in command who was piloting an Atlas.
Aaron de Chevalier?
And the
Cavalier?
Yeah, and the Atlas gets taken out by Inferno SRMs.
Yeah, that seems like an oversight for your ultimate weapon of war, doesn't
They just kept peppering it, and it just exploded.
it? Yeah. Well, that was when
So if you need,
they were. That was. Oh God, I'm probably so wrong on this, and I'm gonna get so much hate mail for it. But I think that was when they were going back to kick out Stefan Amaris, wasn't it? And that was like the final battle.
yeah,
And I think that
yeah,
yeah, because if I remember right, the Chevalier went and in his Atlas kicked down the gates so that Kerensky could get the glory of walking in his Orion and actually stepping into the courtyards. I think that's how that went down.
it says a lot when the guy doesn't want to drive his own mech.
Right.
No, I'm going to take the Orion.
That's a good point. I was thinking, so my thought process was more along the lines of like, how sad is it that you have to rely on actually physically kicking the gate open when you could have just gotten something with a Gauss rifle and shot it from half a planet away.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's also like, here comes Kerensky, the man who designs the ultimate end-all be-all assault mech, and what does he take? A 75-ton heavy.
Yeah, yeah. That's all you need to know, really, there, isn't it? He wouldn't even pilot it himself.
There you go. There you go.
Actually, the only leader that I know that pilots an Atlas, it's an Atlas 2, isn't it? Devin Stone.
Yeah, I think that's
and
right.
That's massively improved.
I do know that there's a bunch of lore that specifically calls out the Atlas as being used throughout almost all the Succession Wars as a command mech. And to me, in my thought process, that also backs up my point, because that means that once the Star League fell and all of these various military commanders had to start making their own tactical choices and looking at their stockpiles of weapons and saying, what do we do with all this now that we have free reign to do whatever they want? They probably looked at the Atlas and went, oh man, this thing's terrible on the battlefield. What do we do? Oh, well, it's great at short range. It's got a shit ton of armor. How about we give it to our commanders who are essentially going to stay in one place and hide and only need to defend themselves if something gets right up close to them?
Makes
for
sense.
9.6 million C-bills, I'm sure that ego probably takes a huge role there too. I mean, if you're a 4-star general in an army or something, and you have the choice between a Marauder and an Atlas, I'd probably take the Atlas just to swing my dick around.
I can see you going, no, I want the tin hat with my general stars on there, please.
Fit it on top of my urban mech, please.
Yeah.
I'd be the one
Christ.
commander out there. It's like you just see this procession of gorgeous, pristine battle mechs, and then 15 minutes later, after the parade ends, here comes this urban mech huffing and puffing along. Who's that? Oh, that's the general.
There's the general with his adjutant. Look, he insists he carries a flag as well.
It's the only urban mech you'll ever see with hand actuators, and it's specifically so I can carry a flag.
Oh man. Well,
Oh, that's funny.
I think we've covered all the ground. It's basically a giant conspiracy. Get your tinfoil hats out, people.
Yeah, I think
Stop being sheeple.
I think that's pretty much the long and short of it. I'm going to grab you all by the shoulders and say the Atlas is a lie. It's not a good. It's a good mech that's intentionally flawed.
I think it is, but I love the fact that someone must have thought about this. Going, I wonder if they'll think of it or catch this detail later on down the line, or whether it's just it's perpetuated itself.
I can see it going one of two ways. Either somebody that was around in the old school FASA days when this all came out, hopefully will see this and watch it and go, oh, they finally got it. Or somebody from FASA back from the old days is going to watch this and go, oh shit, they're kind of right, aren't they? Oh, god damn
it. There's just a guy crying at his desk somewhere, going, my life's work undone.
I tried my best. I thought it was good.
Hand over the money. Buy 6.
Or I'm just saying, for the exact same money, I think I did the math, you can buy like 11 urban mechs, I think.
Oh, you and your goddamn urban mechs.
Hey, all I'm saying,
It's
in
not.
a knockdown,
It's not a measurement.
No, 11 urban mechs versus 1 Atlas. Who's going to win?
Well, it's going to be the 11 urban mechs, isn't it?
Yes.
As soon as they get in close, they're just going to start kicking.
Yes.
Who would do that?
Getting kicked by a trash can of hate is a valid tactic, and I will take that to my grave.
I know, but I want to see this game now. I'm going to run it in Mega Mech.
That actually sounds kind of fun. I might do that later too. I'm gonna figure out exactly. I don't even know if it is actually 11 urban mechs. No, I do know this. An urban mech is what, 900 BV? I think no, it's less than that. It's like 600. I'm gonna look this up.
Yeah, it's like 700, isn't it? You got me looking now too. It's 504 for the bog standard one with the AC-10.
Okay, so 504 into 1800. So that's okay. So it's closer to 4 urban mechs. So I'm talking out of my ass.
Oh, the odds suddenly got better.
That's a good one too. Okay, so I'm gonna say the battle goes to the Atlas in open ground and the urban mechs in confined ground.
Okay, I'm not gonna say that the urban mechs win
because of pride, or because you actually believe that tactically.
Moving on. I think the urban mechs will get some damage in, but I think the Atlas will carry the day. But it will be like fire and ice fighting each other, because neither of them can run away from each other.
Yeah, hopefully you're not playing with the what do they call it, double blind or whatever, where you can't actually see each other in Mega Mech until you get line of sight. Yeah, good luck with that.
Oh my god, that'd be so frustrating. It's going to take 9 turns to find each other. I think we've reached a natural conclusion there of just play it if you like it. If you don't play it.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, then here's probably a good reason that you can tell people.
Yeah.
Either way, you've listened to this, so give us a like and a comment. We need to say thank you to Kirby for writing all these amazing articles, because it must take so much effort. I'm tired thinking about it.
No, I have the easy job. Big thanks go to Shrapnel and all the hard work you put in recording and editing these.
No, without good words, recordings suck. I can tell you that. So on behalf of everyone listening, thank you, Kirby. Leave the comments below on which one you'd like Kirby to roast next.
Yes.
By roast. Yes. I mean tackle intellectually. In an educated and illuminated way.
I do read the comments. I know so if you want to follow me specifically, which I recommend you follow both of us, obviously, because Shrapnel's far more interesting than I. So I am Periphery.
I doubt it. I'm not.
I'm Periphery Paint on Instagram. Yeah, I like to paint pretty things. That's about all I do. I am Periphery Paint on Instagram. I'm not that active on YouTube, but I do go in and read every comment on every video that we post. So if you see a video or script pop up on a Battletech Compendium or Battlemech Compendium video that you suggested, it's probably because you suggested it. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to think. I know this episode, actually, I posted this script on one of the Facebook groups just as like a little ditty, like, here's this thing that I wrote, and oh man, you talk about some angry people. There were angry people. So I'm very interested to hear everybody's take on this, to say the least.
All I've got in my head is just like, you're slagging off their children. Of course they're angry.
Right, here I am, like one of the most iconic mechs next to the Mad Cat, and I just have to poke it in the face.
As it should be in high society.
Right.
So all that remains is for me to say thank you for listening. Don't forget those YouTube niceties and podcast niceties. Go find Kirby on Insta. Give him some love. Look at the eye candy. Trust me, you will not regret it.
Thank you all. Thank you all for listening. I told myself I was not going to be the guy that says smash the bell or smash the subscribe button, but
I've never said it yet.
Smash the bell.
I refuse to say smash that button.
Smash the subscribe button. Oh God, I can feel myself like making one of those stupid grinning thumbnail pictures right now. I need to get off here before it. Thank you all.
So we'll say thank you to listen. Oh fuck. We'll say thank you for listening, and we'll see you all on the next tale. Say bye,
Cheers,
Kirby.
Everybody. Bye, everybody.